The dust had settled into Willa Sutton's lungs years before she ever saw Empire City, back when she was 7 and her parents died of cholera in a wagon train halfway across Kansas. And she had been moving from house to house ever since, unwanted and untethered, until the day a weathered cowboy with eyes like the Nevada sky told her she would never have to leave again. It was 1878, and Willa was 21 years old, standing on the porch of the third foster home in as many years, watching Mrs. Henderson pack her worn carpetbag with the same indifferent efficiency she had seen a dozen times before. The woman would not meet her eyes, just kept folding and packing, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disappointment that Willa had learned to recognize as easily as her own reflection. "The railroad is sending someone to collect you," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice flat. "They have a placement out west, Nevada. Some rancher needs help with his household." Willa said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had heard variations of this speech in Ohio, in Missouri, in 3 different Kansas towns whose names blurred together in her memory. She was too old now, past the age when families wanted to adopt, past the age when anyone saw potential instead of burden. She had become a commodity, shuffled from place to place whenever the charity wore thin or the work became too much or the money ran out. The train ride west took 4 days, and Willa spent most of it staring out the window at the changing landscape, watching the green fade to gold, and then to the harsh browns and reds of the desert. The other passengers gave her space, perhaps sensing the loneliness that clung to her like smoke, perhaps simply uninterested in a young woman traveling alone with nothing but a carpetbag and a worn Bible she could not remember learning to read. Empire City emerged from the desert like a mirage. All weathered wood and false-fronted buildings clustered around a main street that looked perpetually coated in dust. The train station was little more than a platform and a small office, and when Willa stepped down onto the sun-bleached boards, the heat hit her like a physical thing, stealing the breath from her lungs. A man was waiting by a wagon, and Willa knew immediately that he was the rancher Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had been shaped by hard work. His hat was pulled low against the sun, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, the weathered tan of someone who spent his life outdoors. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, and when he pushed his hat back to look at her properly, his eyes were the clear blue of a summer sky. Willa Sutton. His voice was deep, roughened by dust and disuse, but not unkind. "Yes, sir." She had learned long ago to be polite, to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible. "Name is Parker Grayson. I own the Double G Ranch, about 8 miles north of town." He reached for her carpetbag, and she let him take it, watching as he loaded it into the back of the wagon with an ease that spoke of years of practice. "I appreciate you coming all this way. My sister was helping me run the house, but she got married last month and moved to California. I need someone who can cook, clean, help with the ranch work when needed." Willa nodded, climbing up onto the wagon seat when he gestured for her to do so. She had heard similar explanations before, though usually from women, from families who needed an extra pair of hands but could not afford to pay wages. She wondered how long it would be before Parker Grayson decided she was not worth the trouble, before she found herself back on a train heading to yet another temporary home. The ride to the ranch was quiet, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted road, the sun beating down with relentless intensity. Willa studied the landscape, the vast emptiness of it, the way the mountains rose in the distance like jagged teeth against the sky. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and she felt something shift in her chest, some small spark of response to the wildness of it. "You have family back east?" Parker asked after a while, not looking at her, his attention on the horses. "No, sir. They died when I was young." He nodded slowly, as if this explained something. "The arrangement is simple. You work for room and board plus $10 a month. If it does not work out, I will pay your passage back east, no questions asked. But I am hoping it does work out. I am tired of eating my own cooking, and the house has not been properly cleaned since Sarah left." $10 a month was more than Willa had ever been offered before. Most families considered room and board payment enough, and she had learned to be grateful for that much. She felt a flicker of suspicion, wondering what the catch was, what hidden expectations came with such generosity. "I will work hard, sir," she said quietly. "I promise you that." "Parker," he corrected, glancing at her finally. "No need for the sir, we are not formal out here." The Double G Ranch appeared over a rise, and Willa felt her breath catch. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling two-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see several men working near the barn. It looked prosperous, well-maintained, and she wondered again why Parker Grayson needed to send all the way to Kansas for household help. Parker pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, coming around to help Willa descend. His hands were gentle as he steadied her, and she noticed the calluses on his palms, the strength in his grip. "Let me show you around," he said, grabbing her carpetbag and leading her up the porch steps. "The house is bigger than I need, honestly. My father built it thinking he would have a large family, but it ended up just being me and Sarah." She took the room at the end of the hall upstairs. "You can have that one if you like, or there is another one next to it that gets better morning light." The inside of the house was cooler, shaded from the brutal sun, and Willa looked around with wide eyes. The furniture was simple but well made. The floors were dusty but solid wood, and the kitchen was larger than any she had worked in before. There were dishes stacked in the sink, dust on every surface, and a general air of masculine neglect, but underneath it all, she could see the bones of a good home. "I know it is a mess," Parker said, sounding almost apologetic. "Sarah tried to teach me to keep it clean, but I am better with cattle than I am with a broom." "It is a beautiful house," Willa said honestly, running her hand along the back of a chair. "I can have it cleaned up in no time." Parker showed her the rest of the house. The parlor with its fireplace and comfortable chairs, the dining room with a table that could seat 12, the upstairs bedrooms with their plain iron bed frames and simple quilts. Willa chose the room at the end of the hall, the one that had belonged to Parker's sister, because it had a window that looked out over the corrals and the distant mountains, and because something about it felt welcoming in a way she had not experienced in years. "Take some time to settle in," Parker said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "I need to check on the men, but I will be back for supper. Nothing fancy required. Beans and cornbread would be a feast compared to what I have been eating." Willa nodded, and Parker left, his boots heavy on the stairs. She stood alone in the room, listening to the sounds of the ranch filtering through the window, the low of cattle, the shouts of men, the creak of wood settling in the heat. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the wardrobe, placing her brush and mirror on the dresser, tucking her Bible under the pillow out of habit more than faith. Then she went downstairs and began to work. She started with the kitchen, heating water on the stove and washing the accumulated dishes, scrubbing the counters and the table until they gleamed. She swept the floors, beat the dust from the rugs, wiped down every surface she could reach. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the house smelled of lye soap and fresh air, and Willa had beans simmering on the stove and cornbread baking in the oven. Parker returned as the light was fading, his face dusty and tired. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, looking around with an expression of genuine surprise. "You have been busy," he said, pulling off his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I told you to take your time." "I like to work," Willa said simply, ladling beans into bowls. "It feels good to be useful." They ate at the kitchen table, and Willa found herself relaxing slightly in Parker's presence. He was not talkative, but he was not cold either. He asked her about her journey, about the places she had lived, and he listened to her answers with genuine attention. When she mentioned being passed from home to home, his expression darkened slightly, but he did not pry, did not ask questions that would force her to relive the painful details. "This is your last stop forever," Parker said suddenly, setting down his spoon and looking at her directly. "I mean that, Willa. I am not looking for temporary help. I need someone permanent, someone who will make this place a home again. If you are willing to stay, if you are willing to work, then you have a place here for as long as you want it." The words hit Willa like a blow, and she felt her eyes sting with sudden tears. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever offered permanence, stability, a place that would not disappear the moment she became inconvenient. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you promise that to someone you just met?" Parker was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "Because I know what it is like to feel alone," he said finally. "My parents died when I was 19. Sarah was only 15. We had this ranch, but we did not have anyone else. We had each other, and that was enough. But now Sarah is gone, and I am here by myself in this big house, and I am tired of being alone. I think maybe you are too." Willa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Parker reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and solid and real. "Stay," he said simply. "Make this your home. I promise you will not regret it." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Willa had never experienced before. She woke with the sun, made breakfast for Parker and the ranch hands, spent her mornings cleaning and mending and baking. In the afternoons, when the heat became too intense to work inside, Parker taught her to ride, to handle the horses, to move through the ranch with confidence. The men who worked for him were respectful, tipping their hats when they saw her, complimenting her cooking, treating her like she belonged. And slowly, carefully, Willa began to believe that maybe she did belong. Parker was different from anyone she had known before. He was quiet but not distant, strong but not harsh. He worked from dawn until dusk, but he always made time to eat meals with her, to ask about her day, to share stories about the ranch and the town and the desert that surrounded them. He never made her feel like a servant, never treated her as anything less than an equal. Willa found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way his shoulders moved when he worked, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he was gentle with the animals and patient with the men. She told herself it was gratitude she felt, appreciation for his kindness, but deep down, she knew it was becoming something more. 3 weeks after Willa arrived, a late summer storm rolled across the desert, bringing with it sheets of rain and cracks of thunder that shook the house to its foundations. Willa had never seen weather like it, the sudden violence of it after weeks of unrelenting sun, and she found herself standing at the kitchen window, watching the lightning split the sky. Parker came in from securing the barn, soaked through and dripping on the kitchen floor. Willa rushed to get him towels, and he laughed at her concern, his hair plastered to his forehead, water running down his face. "It is just rain," he said, but he took the towels gratefully, stripping off his wet shirt and drying himself off. Willa looked away, her cheeks burning, but not before she noticed the hard planes of his chest, the muscles earned through years of ranch work. "I have never seen it rain like this," she admitted, forcing herself to focus on the window, on anything other than the half-naked man standing in the kitchen. "It is like the sky is falling." "It does not happen often," Parker said, pulling on a dry shirt from the pile of clean laundry Willa had left folded on the chair. "But when it does, it is something to see. Come on, I want to show you something." He took her hand and led her out onto the covered porch, and Willa gasped at the sight before her. The desert was transformed, the rain turning the dust to mud, the dry creek bed behind the house suddenly rushing with water. The mountains in the distance were shrouded in mist, and the whole world smelled of earth and rain and growing things. "It is beautiful," Willa breathed, and Parker smiled, still holding her hand. "I thought you would like it," he said. "Sarah used to love the storms. She said they made the desert feel alive." They stood together in silence, watching the rain, and Willa was acutely aware of Parker's presence beside her, the warmth of his hand around hers, the solid strength of him. When the thunder crashed overhead, she jumped, and Parker pulled her closer, his arm going around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both protective and intimate. "It is all right," he said softly. "You are safe here." Willa looked up at him, at his face so close to hers, and felt something shift between them, some invisible barrier falling away. Parker's eyes darkened, and his hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "Willa," he said, her name a question and a prayer all at once. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his, tentative and unsure but wanting. Parker made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back, his arms coming around her, pulling her against him. The kiss was soft at first, exploratory, and then it deepened, became something hungry and desperate and full of all the loneliness they had both been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Parker rested his forehead against hers. "I did not bring you here for this," he said, his voice rough. "I want you to know that. I brought you here because I needed help and I thought you needed a home. But Willa, I have been half in love with you since the day you stepped off that train, and I do not know how to pretend otherwise anymore." Willa felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not sad tears, not the bitter tears of disappointment and rejection she had cried so many times before. These were tears of relief, of joy, of finally finding something she had thought was lost to her forever. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "I did not think I was allowed to. I did not think someone like you could want someone like me." Parker pulled back, his hands framing her face, his expression fierce. "Someone like you? Willa, you are the strongest person I have ever met. You have been through things I cannot even imagine, and you are still here, still standing, still willing to hope. That takes courage I am not sure I have. I am honored that you are here, that you chose to stay, that you might love me even a fraction as much as I love you." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it, and when the rain finally stopped and the stars began to emerge from behind the clouds, they were still standing on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, whispering promises into the desert night. The next morning, Willa woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Parker already making breakfast, his movements clumsy but determined. "I thought I would give you a morning off," he said, grinning at her sheepishly as he flipped what might have been pancakes but looked more like misshapen blobs. "Though I am starting to remember why Sarah never let me cook." Willa laughed, a sound so bright and genuine it surprised her, and went to help him. They worked together, shoulders brushing, hands touching, and Willa felt a contentment settle into her bones that she had never known before. This was what a home felt like. Not the houses she had been shuttled through, not the temporary rooms and borrowed beds, but this. Laughter and burnt pancakes, and a man who looked at her like she was the sun coming up over the mountains. Over the following weeks, Willa and Parker settled into their new relationship with the same careful attention they gave to everything else. Parker courted her properly, riding into town to buy her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, a cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. He took her on rides across the ranch, showing her his favorite places, the hidden spring where wildflowers grew, the rocky outcropping that provided a view for miles in every direction. Willa found herself opening up in ways she never had before, telling Parker about her childhood, about the families that had taken her in and then sent her away, about the constant fear of never being good enough, of never belonging anywhere. Parker listened to all of it, his eyes never leaving her face, his hand always finding hers. "You belong here," he told her over and over until she began to believe it. "You belong with me." In September, as the heat began to ease and the nights grew cool, Parker took Willa into Empire City for the harvest dance. It was the biggest social event of the year, and the whole town turned out, filling the community hall with music and laughter and the smell of fresh baked pies. Willa wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes, and Parker could not stop looking at her, his gaze following her every movement. When the music started, he led her onto the dance floor, his hand firm at her waist, and Willa felt like she was floating, like she had stepped into a dream she never wanted to wake from. "Everyone is staring," she whispered, acutely aware of the eyes following them, the whispers passing between the townspeople. "Let them stare," Parker said, spinning her gently. "I am dancing with the most beautiful woman in Nevada. I would be disappointed if they were not staring." The evening passed in a blur of music and dancing and introductions to what felt like half the county. People were friendly, welcoming, and Willa began to understand that she was not just Parker's housekeeper in their eyes. She was his intended, his future wife, and they accepted her as such without question. On the ride home, with the stars brilliant overhead and the desert cool and peaceful around them, Parker pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "Willa Sutton," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "I know we have not known each other long, but I also know that I do not want to spend another day of my life without you. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are loved, that you are wanted, that you will never have to leave again?" Willa felt her heart swell until it felt too large for her chest. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Parker, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, passed down through generations of Grayson women. "It is not fancy," he said, holding her hand up to catch the moonlight, "but it is real and it is yours just like my heart." "It is perfect," Willa whispered, looking at the ring, at this tangible symbol of belonging. "You are perfect." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Empire City, with half the town in attendance and Sarah traveling all the way from California to stand as Willa's witness. Sarah was a smaller, softer version of Parker, with the same blue eyes and ready smile, and she embraced Willa like a sister, whispering in her ear that she had been praying for someone exactly like her to find her brother. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Parker kissed Willa with a tenderness that made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They celebrated with a party at the ranch, and the house that had felt so empty when Willa arrived was suddenly filled with laughter and music and joy. That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Parker carried Willa up the stairs to the master bedroom, the room that had been his alone but would now be theirs together. He set her down gently, his hands shaking slightly, and Willa realized with a start that he was as nervous as she was. "We can go slow," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "We have all the time in the world now." But Willa shook her head, reaching up to untie his string tie, to unbutton his shirt. "I have waited my whole life to belong to someone," she said softly. "I do not want to wait any more." They came together with a gentleness that belied their mutual inexperience, learning each other's bodies with care and patience and growing passion. Parker was reverent, worshipful almost, in the way he touched her, and Willa felt herself respond to him in ways she had not known were possible. They made love slowly, thoroughly, and when it was over they lay tangled together in the sheets, their bodies still humming with the echoes of pleasure. "I love you," Parker whispered into her hair, his arms tight around her. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Willa said, feeling the truth of it in every cell of her body. "You saved me, Parker. You gave me a home, a family, a life. I will never stop being grateful for that." "You saved me too," Parker said, tilting her face up so he could look into her eyes. "This house was just walls and a roof before you came. You made it a home. You made me remember what it feels like to be happy." The first year of their marriage passed in a haze of happiness that Willa would not have believed possible. She threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a garden behind the house, filling the rooms with warmth and life. Parker was attentive and loving, never letting a day pass without telling her how much he loved her, how grateful he was that she had agreed to be his wife. They worked together seamlessly, Willa managing the household and helping with the smaller ranch tasks, Parker handling the cattle and the business side of things. The ranch prospered under their joint attention, and by the spring of 1879, Parker was talking about expanding, about buying more land and increasing the herd. It was in May that Willa realized her monthly courses had stopped, that the nausea she felt in the mornings was not from something she had eaten but from the new life growing inside her. She told Parker one evening after supper, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, and she watched as understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by a joy so profound it took her breath away. "A baby," he said, his voice cracking. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Willa confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "In the winter, I think. Late January or early February." Parker pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt wetness on his cheeks, realized he was crying too. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the promise of their growing family. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Willa struggled with exhaustion and sickness that seemed to strike at the most inconvenient times. But Parker was endlessly patient, taking over more of the household tasks, bringing her cool water and damp cloths, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of long days. Sarah visited in August, staying for 2 weeks and fussing over Willa like a mother hen. She brought baby clothes she had sewn herself, gave advice on everything from morning sickness to childbirth, and made Willa promise to send for her when the baby came. "You are glowing," Sarah told her one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "I know you do not feel like it, but you are." Parker cannot stop talking about the baby. Every letter he sends is full of it. "You have made him so happy, Willa. I cannot thank you enough for that." "He has made me happy too," Willa said, looking out at the ranch, at the land that had become hers, at the life she had built here. "I never thought I could have this. A husband who loves me, a home, a baby on the way. It feels like a dream sometimes." "It is not a dream," Sarah said firmly, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "It is real, and it is what you deserve. Do not ever doubt that." As fall arrived and the temperatures cooled, Willa's belly swelled and she found herself moving more slowly, tiring more easily. Parker watched her like a hawk, constantly worried that she was doing too much, that she should be resting more. Willa found his concern both endearing and slightly exasperating, but she could not deny that she loved being cared for, loved knowing that someone was watching out for her. In December, they received word that Sarah had given birth to a daughter, and Parker rode into town to send a telegram of congratulations. He returned with news that Sarah and her husband would visit in the spring, once both babies were old enough to travel, and Willa felt a rush of excitement at the thought of their children growing up together, of having family close by. The baby came on a cold night in late January, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Willa's labor started in the evening, gentle contractions that she initially dismissed as false labor. But by midnight, the pains were coming hard and fast, and Parker sent one of the ranch hands racing into town for the doctor while he stayed by Willa's side, holding her hand and trying to hide his terror. The doctor arrived just after dawn, and by that time, Willa was exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her grip on Parker's hand tight enough to leave bruises. The doctor examined her and declared that the baby would be here within the hour, and Parker refused to leave, staying at Willa's side despite the doctor's suggestions that childbirth was not a place for husbands. "She is my wife," Parker said firmly, his eyes never leaving Willa's face. "I am staying." The final hour was the longest of Willa's life, pain beyond anything she had imagined, her body tearing apart to bring new life into the world. But Parker was there, his voice steady and calm, telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. And when the baby finally came, sliding into the doctor's waiting hands with a lusty cry, Willa felt a rush of love so intense it made everything else fade to nothing. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a blanket before placing him in Willa's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Willa looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and tiny fists, and felt tears stream down her cheeks. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and he was hers. Parker leaned over her shoulder, his own tears falling freely, and reached out to touch the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "He is beautiful," Parker whispered. "You did so well, Willa. You were amazing." They named him Thomas Parker Grayson, after Parker's father, and he became the center of their world from that moment forward. Parker was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, giving Willa time to rest and recover. The ranch hands doted on the baby, taking turns holding him and making silly faces to earn his first smiles. Sarah and her husband visited in April, bringing their daughter Emma, and the two women spent hours talking about motherhood, about the joys and challenges of raising children. Willa watched Parker play with Thomas and Emma, saw the gentle way he handled the babies, and fell in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but infinitely richer. Willa had never been happier, had never felt more complete. She had a husband who adored her, a son who needed her, a home that was truly hers. The girl who had been passed from house to house, who had never belonged anywhere, was gone. In her place was Willa Grayson, wife and mother, woman of substance and worth. Thomas grew quickly, and by his first birthday he was walking and getting into everything. his curiosity boundless and exhausting. Parker built him a small wooden horse that he could ride around the yard, and Willa sewed him clothes that he inevitably covered in dirt within minutes of putting them on. The house rang with laughter and the sounds of childhood, and Willa sometimes had to stop and pinch herself to make sure it was all real. In the summer of 1881, Willa realized she was pregnant again, and this time, the news was met with excitement rather than nervous wonder. They knew what to expect now, knew they could handle whatever came. Parker expanded the house, adding another bedroom and a larger kitchen, preparing for their growing family. Their daughter, Grace Ann Grayson, was born in March of 1882, and she was as different from Thomas as night from day. Where Thomas had been loud and demanding from birth, Grace was quiet and observant, watching everything with solemn eyes. She had Willa's dark hair and delicate features, and Parker was completely besotted with her from the moment he first held her. "I am outnumbered now," he joked, looking at Willa with Grace in his arms and Thomas clinging to his leg. 3 against 1 is not fair odds." "You love it," Willa said, kissing him softly. "Admit it, you love every minute of this chaos." "I do," Parker agreed, his expression turning serious. "I love you, Willa. I love our family. I love the life we have built together. I thank God every day that you stepped off that train in Empire City." "Me too," Willa said, looking around at her home, at her children, at the man who had promised her she would never have to leave again. "Me too." The years flowed forward like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas started school in Empire City, riding into town with Parker each morning and showing a quick mind and easy charm that reminded Willa of his father. Grace grew into a sweet, gentle child who loved helping Willa in the garden and playing with the barn cats. In 1884, twin boys arrived, Samuel and David, identical in every way except for a small birthmark on Samuel's left shoulder. The house became even more chaotic, even more full of life, and Willa and Parker fell into bed exhausted every night, only to wake early and do it all over again. The ranch continued to prosper, and Parker's reputation as a fair boss and skilled rancher spread throughout the county. He hired more men, expanded the operations, and began raising horses in addition to cattle. Willa managed it all with a calm competence that surprised even her, keeping the books, managing supplies, making sure everyone was fed and clothed and cared for. Sarah and her family moved back to Nevada in 1885, buying a ranch just 20 miles south of the Double G, and the two families became inseparable. The cousins grew up together, and Willa finally had the sister she had always longed for. They supported each other through the hard times, celebrated together during the good times, and built a network of family that stretched across the desert. In the spring of 1887, Willa stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Thomas help his father with the horses, watching Grace chase the twins around the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. She was 30 years old, and sometimes she still could not quite believe this was her life. Parker came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything," Willa said, leaning back against him. "I was thinking about the day I arrived here, how scared I was, how certain I was that this would be just another temporary stop. I was thinking about how you promised me this was my last stop forever, and how you kept that promise." "It was not a hard promise to keep," Parker said, turning her in his arms so he could look at her face. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." "It has been 9 years," Willa said, reaching up to touch his face to trace the lines that time and sun had carved there. "9 years. And I still wake up some mornings afraid it is all a dream, that I will wake up alone in some stranger's house, being told to pack my things and move on. "Look at me," Parker said, his voice firm but gentle. He waited until her eyes met his, until she was focused entirely on him. "You are not going anywhere. This is your home. I am your husband. Those are our children. Nothing is going to change that. Not time, not circumstance, nothing. You are stuck with me, Willa Grayson, for the rest of our lives." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. "Good," she said, smiling through them, "because I cannot imagine being anywhere else." They stood together on the porch, watching their children play, the sun warm on their faces and the future stretching out before them like the desert horizon, endless and full of promise. Willa thought about the girl she had been, passed from home to home, unwanted and untethered, and she marveled at how far she had come, at how much she had gained. She thought about all the families that had taken her in and then sent her away, and she understood now that they had not been wrong about her. She had not belonged with them because she had been meant for this, for Parker and the Double G Ranch and the family they had built together. Every rejection, every move, every moment of loneliness had been leading her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. "Thank you," she whispered, though she was not entirely sure who she was thanking. Parker, certainly, for seeing her worth when she could not see it herself. But also fate, or God, or whatever force had guided her across the country to Empire City, to the moment when a tall cowboy with blue eyes had loaded her carpetbag into a wagon and promised her a home. "For what?" Parker asked, kissing her temple. "For everything," Willa said simply. "For all of this." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Parker called the children in for supper. They came running, dirt-streaked and laughing, tumbling up the porch steps and into the house. Willa followed them inside, Parker's hand warm in hers, and as she looked around at the controlled chaos of her family, she felt a peace settle into her soul that she knew would last for the rest of her days. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, and the everyday moments that made up a life. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, showing an aptitude for ranching that made Parker's chest swell with pride. Grace became a beautiful young woman, talented with horses and possessing a gentle way with animals that drew every creature on the ranch to her. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief together, their laughter a constant soundtrack to life at the Double G. In 1890, when Willa was 33, she gave birth to their sixth and final child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah, after both of the women who had shaped their lives. The pregnancy had been harder than the others, and the doctor told them there should be no more children, but Willa did not mourn. She had been given more than she had ever dreamed possible, more than she had ever dared to hope for. Parker was in his early 40s now, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, his face lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. He was as devoted to Willa as he had been on their wedding day, still bringing her wildflowers from the desert, still telling her he loved her every morning and every night. Thomas was 12, old enough to take on real responsibilities around the ranch, and Parker began teaching him everything he knew about running the business. Grace, at 10, was Willa's right hand, helping with the younger children and managing the household with a competence beyond her years. The twins, now 8, were in school and showing signs of their father's head for business, always thinking of new ways to make money or improve the ranch operations. The Double G had grown significantly over the years, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Parker had been approached multiple times by larger outfits wanting to buy him out, but he always refused. This was his legacy, he said, his children's inheritance, and no amount of money could convince him to sell. Willa had become a pillar of the community, known for her kindness and her competence. She organized charity drives for families in need, taught Sunday school at the church, and served on the school board. The woman who had once been shuffled from home to home, considered a burden and an inconvenience, was now one of the most respected women in Empire City. One evening in the fall of 1892, as Willa was putting Elizabeth to bed, the little girl looked up at her with solemn eyes. "Mama, why do I not have any grandparents?" she asked. "Emma has grandparents who visit, but I do not." Willa felt her heart clench, but she smiled gently and smoothed Elizabeth's hair back from her forehead. "Your father's parents died before you were born," she explained. "And my parents died when I was very young. But you have Aunt Sarah and Uncle James, and you have all of your cousins, and you have a mama and papa who love you very much. That is family too." "But were you lonely?" Elizabeth persisted, her child's instinct picking up on something unspoken. "When you were little and did not have a mama and papa?" "Yes," Willa admitted, seeing no point in lying. "I was very lonely for a very long time. But then I met your papa and he gave me a home, and then I had you and your brothers and sisters, and now I am not lonely anymore. Now I have more love than I ever imagined possible." Elizabeth seemed satisfied with this answer, snuggling down under her quilt. "I am glad Papa found you," she said sleepily. "I am glad you are my mama." "I am glad too, sweetheart," Willa whispered, kissing her forehead. "I am glad too." She left Elizabeth's room and went downstairs, where Parker was sitting in the parlor, reading through the account books. He looked up when she entered, and his face softened into the smile he reserved just for her. "Everything all right?" he asked, setting the books aside. "Everything is perfect," Willa said, settling into the chair beside him. "Elizabeth asked about grandparents, about my childhood. I told her the truth, that I was lonely, but now I am not." Parker reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Not having family of your own, not knowing where you came from?" Willa considered the question carefully. It was true that she sometimes wondered about her parents, about who they had been beyond the few vague memories she retained. But the pain of their loss had faded over the years, replaced by the richness of the life she had built. "I used to," she admitted. "When I was being moved from place to place, I used to dream that some relative would appear and claim me, that I would discover I belonged somewhere after all. But I realize now that family is not just blood. Family is the people who choose to love you, who choose to stay. You chose me, Parker. You gave me a family when I had none. How could I regret anything that led me to you?" Parker pulled her from her chair and into his lap, holding her close. "You chose me too," he reminded her. "You could have left, could have gone back east or moved on to somewhere else. But you stayed. You chose this life, chose me and the ranch and Empire City. That took courage, Willa. That took faith." "You made it easy," Willa said, resting her head on his shoulder. "You made me feel wanted from the very beginning. You saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw a burden. That is why I love you. That is why I will always love you." They sat together in the quiet parlor, the house settling around them, the sounds of their children sleeping upstairs a comforting presence. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, beautiful and harsh in theirs. The 20th century arrived with hope and promise, and the Grayson family celebrated by hosting a massive party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew. The house was packed with friends and neighbors, all of them toasting the new century, the new possibilities, the bright future that seemed to shimmer just beyond the horizon. Thomas was 16 now, nearly a man, and already the girls in town were starting to notice him. Parker joked that they would have to beat them away with a stick, But Willa saw the way Thomas watched the daughter of the local banker, a sweet girl named Margaret, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her eldest son fell in love. Grace was 14, poised on the edge of womanhood, her beauty and kindness making her popular with her peers. The twins were 12, still getting into trouble but showing signs of the men they would become. And Elizabeth, at 10, was the baby of the family, spoiled by her older siblings and adored by her parents. In 1903, Thomas married Margaret in a ceremony that brought tears to Willa's eyes. She watched her son pledge his life to his bride, saw the love shining in his eyes, and remembered the day she had married Parker, the promises they had made to each other. Thomas brought Margaret to live at the ranch, and Parker began construction on a small house on the property for them, ensuring that the next generation of Graysons would have roots on the Double G. The following year, Sarah died suddenly of a fever, and Willa grieved deeply for the woman who had been like a sister to her. Parker held her through the worst of it, his own grief for his sister a quiet, steady thing. They attended the funeral together, their children surrounding them, and Willa was grateful beyond words for the family they had built, for the love that sustained them through even the darkest times. Grace married in 1907, choosing a young rancher from the neighboring county, and she moved away, though not so far that Willa could not visit regularly. The twins went to university, studying business and agriculture, and Elizabeth, ever the independent one, announced her intention to become a teacher. The house grew quieter as the children left to build their own lives, but Willa did not mourn the change. She had raised her children to be strong and independent, to go out into the world and make their mark. That they did so was a testament to the home she and Parker had created, to the love and stability they had provided. In 1910, Thomas and Margaret made Willa and Parker grandparents for the first time, a daughter they named Willa after her grandmother. Willa held her tiny namesake and felt a surge of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. This was legacy, she realized. This was what it meant to belong, to be woven into the fabric of a family so completely that your presence echoed into the future. More grandchildren followed over the years, as each of Willa's children married and started families of their own. The ranch hosted holiday gatherings that grew larger each year, the house ringing with the voices of 3 generations of Graysons. Willa moved through the chaos with serene happiness, cooking and serving and watching her family with eyes that still sometimes filled with tears of gratitude. Parker aged gracefully, his hair going white, his movements slower but still sure. He handed over more and more of the ranch operations to Thomas, content to spend his days with Willa, working in the garden she had expanded over the years, riding out to their favorite spots on the property, simply being together. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, Parker took Willa back to the spot where he had proposed, the rise overlooking the ranch where they had stood under the stars and pledged their lives to each other. They were both older now, marked by time and life, but the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered decades together. "You remember what I told you the day you arrived?" Parker asked, holding her close as they watched the sun set over the desert. "You told me this was my last stop forever," Willa said, smiling at the memory. "You promised me I would never have to leave again. And have I kept that promise?" "Every single day," Willa said, turning to look at him, at the face she loved more than her own. "Every single day you have made me feel wanted, loved, essential. You gave me a home, Parker. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Parker said, his voice thick with emotion. "You took this empty house and filled it with love. You gave me children, grandchildren, a legacy. You made my life mean something, Willa. I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to live." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting and beautiful together. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were beginning to emerge, and Willa thought about all the nights she had lain awake in strange beds, staring at those same stars, wondering if she would ever find a place to call home. "I found it," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Parker or to the younger version of herself, the girl who had endured so much. "I found home. I found love. I found everything I was looking for." Parker held her hand as they walked back to the house, their home, the place where they had built a life together. Behind them, the desert stretched endlessly, beautiful and unforgiving, but ahead of them, the windows of the house glowed with warm light, and Willa could see their family moving inside, could hear the echo of laughter and conversation. This was what she had been searching for all those years, through all those temporary homes and broken promises. Not just a place to live, but a place to belong. Not just shelter, but love. Not just survival, but joy. And she had found it all in the arms of a cowboy who had looked at a lonely, lost young woman and seen not a burden, but a treasure. Who had promised her a home, and then spent 3 decades proving that his word was as solid as the mountains that surrounded them. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. In 1915, Parker fell ill with pneumonia, and for a terrifying week, Willa thought she might lose him. She sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, telling him stories about their life together, begging him not to leave her. Parker pulled through, but he was weaker after that, his body finally showing the effects of decades of hard work. He handed full control of the ranch to Thomas and declared himself retired, much to everyone's amusement since he still insisted on doing light chores and checking on the animals daily. Willa, now 58, felt the weight of age in her joints and in the silver that had completely overtaken her dark hair. But she still moved through her days with purpose, still filled the house with the smells of baking and the sounds of welcome. Her grandchildren adored her, and she spent hours telling them stories about the old days, about how the West had changed, about the love story that had brought her and their grandfather together. On quiet evenings, when it was just her and Parker in the parlor, the rest of the family gone to their own homes, Willa would sometimes take out the carpet bag she had arrived with, the one that had held all her worldly possessions on that day in 1878. It was worn now, the fabric faded and the handles frayed, but she had kept it all these years, a reminder of where she had come from. "Why do you keep that old thing?" Parker asked one night, watching her run her fingers over the fabric. "Because I never want to forget," Willa said simply. "I never want to forget what it felt like to be lost, to be unwanted. I never want to forget the gift you gave me when you told me I could stay forever. This bag represents everything I left behind, and I keep it to remind myself of everything I gained." Parker reached out and covered her hand with his fingers bent with arthritis but his grip still warm and sure. "We were both lost," he said. "I was rattling around in this big house, lonely and aimless. You gave me purpose, Willa. You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day. We saved each other." "Yes," Willa agreed, leaning into him. "We did." In the summer of 1920, the family gathered at the Double G to celebrate Parker's 65th birthday. All 5 of their children came, bringing spouses and children and even a few grandchildren. The house was bursting at the seams, loud and chaotic and perfect. Willa watched Parker hold court in the parlor, surrounded by his descendants, telling stories about the old days, about driving cattle and breaking horses and building the ranch from nothing. His face was weathered and lined, but his eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and humor that had first attracted her, and she felt her heart swell with love. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Willa and Parker sat on the porch swing, rocking gently in the cool night air. The desert was silver under the moonlight, peaceful and eternal, and Willa felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. 42 years, Parker said softly, his arm around her shoulders. 42 years since you stepped off that train, and I am more in love with you now than I was then. How is that possible? Willa asked, smiling up at him. We were so young then, so full of hope and uncertainty. I thought I loved you as much as it was possible to love someone. Love grows, Parker said, kissing her forehead. It deepens. Every year, every challenge we faced together, every joy we shared, it all added to what we have. That is what people do not understand about marriage. It is not about the grand gestures or the passionate moments. It is about the everyday choices to stay, to work together, to keep choosing each other. You made it easy to choose you, Willa said, her eyes drifting closed as exhaustion pulled at her. You made it easy to stay. Good, Parker murmured, holding her close. Because I am not done with you yet, Willa Grayson. I plan to love you for at least another 42 years. Willa laughed softly, but she did not argue. They had been blessed with long life and good health, with a family that loved them and a legacy that would endure. Who was to say they could not have another 4 decades together? As it turned out, they had 13 more years, 13 precious years of watching their grandchildren grow, of welcoming great-grandchildren, of sitting on the porch and remembering all the moments that had made up their life together. Parker died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1933, his hand still clasped in Willa's. He was 78 years old and had lived to see the Double G Ranch become one of the most successful in Nevada, to see his children prosper and his grandchildren thrive. He died knowing he was loved, surrounded by family in the home he had built with his own hands. Willa grieved deeply for the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for more than half a century. But even in her grief, she was grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, for every sunrise they had watched together, for every challenge they had overcome. She continued to live in the ranch house, refusing all offers from her children to move in with them. This was her home, she said firmly. This was where Parker's presence still lingered in every room, where their love story had unfolded. She would not leave it for anything. Willa lived another 7 years, watching the world change around her, watching her family continue to grow and prosper. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about the Old West, about cowboy life, about a love story that had begun with a promise and lasted a lifetime. On a warm spring morning in 1940, Willa Grayson passed away in her sleep, in the bedroom she had shared with Parker for 5 decades. She was 83 years old, and she died as she had lived the last 62 years of her life, at home, surrounded by love, certain of her place in the world. At her funeral, the church in Empire City was packed to capacity with children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, along with dozens of friends and neighbors whose lives she had touched. They spoke of her kindness, her strength, her unwavering dedication to family. They spoke of the love story she had shared with Parker, a love that had become legendary in Empire City, held up as an example of what marriage could be when 2 people truly committed to each other. Thomas, now 60 years old and the patriarch of the Grayson family, stood at his mother's grave and thought about the woman who had arrived in Empire City as a lost, lonely young woman, passed from home to home for years with no place to call her own. He thought about how his father had seen her worth when no one else had, how he had promised her a home and then spent his life making good on that promise. "This is your last stop forever," Thomas said softly, repeating the words his father had spoken to his mother so many years ago. "You found your home, Mama. You found your place. And we are all here because of the love you and Papa shared, because you chose to stay, because you built something lasting and beautiful." He placed a bouquet of wildflowers on her grave, the same kind Parker used to bring her from the desert. And as he walked away, he felt a sense of peace. His parents were together again, reunited after 7 long years apart, and their legacy lived on in the dozens of descendants who carried their blood, their values, their love forward into the future. The Double G Ranch continued to thrive for generations, always remaining in the Grayson family, a testament to the vision and hard work of Parker and Willa. The original ranch house was preserved, turned into a museum of sorts, where family members could visit and remember the couple who had started it all. And every year, on the anniversary of Parker and Willa's wedding, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. They told the story of how Parker had met Willa at the train station, how he had promised her a home, how their love had grown and deepened over the decades. They told the story because it was important, because it reminded them where they came from, because it was proof that love, real love, could conquer loneliness and loss, and all the challenges life threw at you. The story of Willa Sutton, who had been passed from home to home for years, until a cowboy named Parker Grayson told her she would never have to leave again, became part of the family mythology, passed down from generation to generation. A reminder that sometimes, when you least expect it, you find exactly where you are meant to be. And in the end, that was the truth of it. Willa had spent 14 years searching for a home, moving from place to place, never quite fitting, never quite belonging. But she had found it at last in the arms of a man who saw her not as a burden, but as a blessing. She had found it in the wide open spaces of the Nevada desert, in the ranch house that had become a home, in the family she had built from nothing. She had found her last stop, her forever home, and she had spent 62 years making it everything she had ever dreamed of and more. And in doing so, she had created a legacy of love that would endure long after she was gone. A reminder that even the loneliest soul can find belonging, that even the most lost can find their way home, if only they find someone willing to say those 5 magic words that change everything. This is your last stop forever.